Welcome to another episode of the Economics Design Podcast. This is episode 20, and this will be the last episode of this entire season 1. In the past 2 weeks, we have covered the basics of bonding curves. We talked about the different math implications of bonding curves and how it affects the different incentive mechanisms. We also talked about how bonding curves can be applied in different areas in DeFi, in the specific area of autonomous market makers, in decentralized exchanges, or even portfolio management. So DeFi has a lot of different aspects, and bonding curve has a role to play in the whole DeFi ecosystem. Let's change gear a little today and go into the fundraising mechanism. Bonding curve has a lot more applications than just the DeFi space. And today specifically, we're going to look at fundraising. We're going to cover a couple of things today. Firstly, the idea of bonding curves and fundraising, the general concept of bonding curves. Bonding curves and fundraising is quite different from bonding curves in autonomous market makers, because in autonomous market maker, there is a general formula that can follow. If you check our previous episode, I've summarized them into 4 different algorithms, 4 different formulas or bonding curve algorithms that are used in all these autonomous market makers that is in the DeFi space. With bonding curves in fundraising, however, this is quite different, because fundraising is very subjective to your project, to your needs, to your ecosystem that you're facing, to the objectives that you're looking at. Bonding curve application in fundraising has a very different style to bonding curve in the autonomous market maker. For bonding curve in fundraising, we're going to look at 2 types of token functions. Remember, in the last episode, we talked about the sums of token functions: security, utility, money, which is your currency, and stablecoin, which is your pegged tokens. So 4 of them. In the last episode, we covered the stable coin function or the stable token function and also the utility token function by using a bonding curve on the utility function of autonomous market maker. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on security as well. So utility and security in the aspect of the token functions. In this video, we're going to look at the 2 different types of token functions. The first one is the utility token function, and the second is the security token function. For the utility token function, we're going to look at how bonding curves help in fundraising with the token having a utility function. And we're going to look at 3 platforms: Giveth, Aragon, and Molecule. For the security token function, these bonding curves have a form of a security, financial security, an underlying security, underlying asset that will generate revenue for these tokens, and these tokens will increase in revenue as part of profits. So this is where the difference lies. And lastly, always, the entire point of all of this is for you to understand how it can be applied to your project. You as a project designer have to understand, okay, this is how bonding curves are used in the different kind of token functions. These are the variables to consider. This is the general concept of the math involved, and then I can apply it to my project. Or if you are an investor, if you're a DeFi investor, a fundraising investor, or any investor in all these projects, it's very important to understand the design of this internal economy. You cannot just rely on the external economy, the external market, or the secondary market to rely on that for price discovery. You also have to have fundamental valuation of what is going on within the economy, how the economy is being designed. And that's why I'm making all these videos, to educate you, to teach you, to help you to understand how to design this, how to evaluate this as an investor, and how to make sure that you are designing the right kind of incentives, you're aligning the right kind of incentives as entrepreneurs or as designers of these ecosystems. What I want to show is that when we talk about fundraising, the token function with utility and security has a little overlap. The thing is, because tokens can be used with a security function or a utility function. These are just taxonomies, different categorizations of tokens. This categorization is important for us to understand and evaluate, or even to create some types of standardization of regulation of all these tokens. So that's why I'm classifying them in 2 different ways. But I can also make a broader umbrella to put both of these 2 token functions together under the area of fundraising. Because when we talk about fundraising, we're using tokens to fundraise. And these tokens can be in the form of utility function or security function. Before we go into further details and going straight into the application, I know we've already covered a lot about bonding curves and the general concept of bonding curves, I want to talk a little bit more about the general application of bonding curves in fundraising. Bonding curves in fundraising. Again, I like to use the who, what, when, where, why, how method because it gives you a better understanding and gives you a better foundation to get started. So what is it used for? As you can imagine, it's fundraising, right? It's to raise money for a specific cause. The cause can be anything. It can be donation, equity, research, whatever, you name it. And why do we want to do that? Because we want to align the incentives and to solve free rider problems. This can be done in a lot of different ways. You can have different kind of taxes. This is where sigmoid curves that we talked about in 2 episodes ago. Sigmoid curves can come in to model different kind of tax returns on your different fundraising mechanisms. You can look at different buy-sell curves, different bonding curves for buying and selling. You can look at a third dimension to curve, because right now we're just talking about the curves having 2 variables interlinking. We can add the third dimension, which is the variable of time, and how these 3 variables come together, and we can explore this in a very complicated way. What we've been talking so far, especially 2 episodes ago, was a lot of 2D curves, 2D graphs, where variable A interacts with variable B. But now we can also include a third variable, for example, time, because fundraising is also quite critical with time. So if we add a third variable in, how will this change the scope of fundraising? How will this change the scope of bonding curves? So there are a lot of different aspects to consider and to fit in. So this can get really exciting. But once again, we always start from basic. I just want you to realize how important or how much bonding curve can change and affect the system with aligning of incentives, with solving free riders' problems. There is no one size that fits everything. It really depends on your system. And you can just pick and choose the different variables or the different qualities that you want, and then input it into your different model. How is it done? Once again, it's always done through math. The cool thing about math is that it's based on logic. I know right now there's this whole 2 + 2 = 5 going on. We're not going to go into that very complex philosophical math. We're talking about logical math. We're going to talk about the addition and subtraction of the same items and the correlation between item A and item B, which is your token A and token B. We're going to talk about things that's a lot simpler, a lot of things that has to be dealing with logic and business logic. Then we can automate all these with smart contracts. The smart contracts and machines, specifically, can help us with all these math functions or math equations. Where do we find them? In general, we find them in continuous organization. Sure, we talk a lot about fundraising, but the idea of fundraising is to support an organization. And this organization will continuously grow, will keep growing, and so we just call them continuous organization. Or you can just call them organizations. How I would differentiate them is that continuous organizations are always fundraising, are always getting money, are always incurring money until they decide to stop. Organizations on its own can exist without fundraising. So Amazon, for example, are an organization. They don't need to keep fundraising. But another company that is, let's say, a startup that is going Series A after Series B after Series C after Series D. And all of these fundraising pitching rounds are because they're getting investors in, giving equity out or giving some profits out to these different investors or participants. And that's where you have continuous organizations. Who uses them? You can use them in a lot of different ways. A few ways that I can just share right now is equity, research, social causes, donation. When is it used? It's used when business logics can be automated and they can be embedded with different kind of incentives in your model, and also when you're looking for ongoing fundraising. Because there's an ongoing fundraising involved, there's a different type of incentive mechanism in play. And that's why bonding curves in fundraising will be very different from bonding curves in autonomous market maker that we talked about last week. So let's get started with utility function. Remember what's utility function? A token with a utility function is when a token, it's an internal token within the ecosystem. It generally just resides within the ecosystem. It doesn't interact so much with the outside world. In fact, it rarely reacts very much with the outside world, because it's a utility function. Its use case is for within that primary ecosystem, that primary network. So that's a token utility function. In this aspect, we're going to look at 3 different use cases. The first one is Giveth. Giveth is an organization, it's a platform that supports a lot of different social causes. They have a variation in bonding curves. The bonding curve seems to be slightly complicated, but don't worry. It works in a similar way, where you put money into the bonding curve, let's say DAI into the bonding curve, and the bonding curve will be minting X tokens, which is, let's say, Lisa tokens. And out of this DAI that goes in, maybe 50% of the DAI goes into this funding pool, and 50% of the DAI goes into a reserve pool. And based on these 2 different pools, the DAI used in these 2 different pools are being allocated in different ways. So the reserve pool will be the collaterals for the bonding curve. And if you want to take something out of the bonding curve, if you want to redeem Lisa tokens for DAI tokens, it will come from that reserve pool. But remember I said that Giveth is all about social causes. What does that mean? It means that this DAI that you donate can also go into different kind of social causes. For example, cleaning the beach. And so money from the funding pool will be allocated to this proposal of cleaning the beach. Then there's also a different factor called the factor of time. And based on the factor of time, the early investors have to vest or have to stake their tokens for X amount of time, let's say 12 months, before they can redeem it. There are a lot more math and economic principles behind it, but that's not the purpose of this video. Otherwise, I'm going to make another 1-hour video. I just want to keep it a bit more simpler, a bit more easy to understand. So for you to understand how bonding curves are being applied to these various use cases. Specifically for Giveth platform, we're looking at 5 different variables. Remember in the first episode of token bonding curves, we talked about how token bonding curves are coordinating 2 variables, price and quantity. So if you think about a simple model, you have price and quantity. As the quantity increases, then the price will also increase according to that line. So that line shows the relationship. However, with this new token bonding curve, or this new bonding curve in the Giveth platform, we're looking at more variables. So if we're looking at just price and quantity, how many variables are there? It's just 2 variables, right? It's very simple. Now we're looking at 5 different variables. Why? Because initially we have, again, just 2 variables, right? You have the x-axis and the y-axis. Instead of price and quantity, we now have token A and token B, which, if you think about it, is quite similar to the Uniswap exchange model, because it's Ether versus, let's say, DAI. So 2 tokens. But right now we are also including 3 other variables. The first one is the different pools available. So remember I said that in Giveth, you have 2 types of pools available. One is a funding pool and one is a reserve pool. So based on that, you have 2 additional pools that I've written. And lastly, you also have another variable called time. And this is where I mentioned you can maybe turn this into a 3D curve, or you can just put them in as an arbitrary number into your ecosystem to define time in some simple way. So time is an aspect that they have in the Giveth platform. You can use it, you don't have to use it, but this is what they have. So they have 5 different variables in their platform. And that's why it's slightly different. It's a variation of it. And based on that, that's the main difference. I know there are a lot more details to be discussed. How do we align incentives? How do we resolve free riders' problems? That is going into the details of the bonding curve of Giveth, which we're not going to do in this episode. But we're going to go into the next case study of Aragon. Aragon is very interesting because Aragon is a mix of the autonomous market maker style and the style that we talked about just now, the Giveth style. So what is the autonomous market maker style? The autonomous market maker style is you have a curve that is similar to Bancor's curve. So it's a concave function. The whole idea of Aragon platforms and the bonding curve on Aragon is to be a constant liquidity provider. So it's always providing liquidity into the system. People can just exchange tokens anytime they want. And it's inspired by Bancor. That's why I say it's autonomous market maker style, because the formulas they use with the reserve ratio is the same one that Bancor has created. So that's the Aragon style. how is the bonding curve used specifically in the Aragon platform? Once again, they have 5 different variables. They have the connection with token A and token B. So token A will be your token ABC, and token B will be your collateral token. So once again, we can imagine a map, a graph with an axis of token ABC on one side and the token DAI, which is the collateral, on the other side. The 2 pools that I talked about just now in Giveth is that whenever money goes into the collateral, the bonding curve doesn't keep 100% of the collaterals. It keeps a certain percentage to a reserve pool and a certain percentage to another pool. The other pool can be called funding pool, can be called discretionary pool, whatever you want to name it. But one pool is for reserve. So when anyone wants to take money out of the bonding curve, it comes from that pool. And the other pool is a pool where money will be allocated. So that is quite similar. The difference in Aragon is that who decides this allocation, this disbursement of pool, of this discretionary pool, is governed by a DAO, DAO. So this is decentralized autonomous organization where people who have the token can vote on the different proposals on how they want to allocate the tokens, which is very, very fun because this is aligned with the philosophy of decentralized organizations or decentralization, where we're giving power to the people, we're giving responsibility to the people. Now people get to vote, people get to choose, people get to decide how to allocate the funds to the different projects. And the last project that I want to talk about is Molecule. With Aragon, usually people use that to fundraise for their project. So instead of an ICO, they do a DICO, and they use Aragon's protocol to be fundraising. With the Giveth platform, it's usually used for social causes and donation. With Molecule, it's used to be funding research. So if you go to Molecule's platform, it's very focused on medical research or pharmaceutical research. They've also done quite a bit on the COVID-19 research. And the thing about research, and I understand that, is that sometimes there is a huge lack in funding because what you are interested in and what you want to research, it's not aligned to what these sponsors want. So maybe Coca-Cola wants to sponsor a study on obesity to understand the impact of sugar on obesity. So they're incentivized to want to fund this research. But maybe your interest is how does Coca-Cola affect the productivity of an individual at a young age from 10 to 15. Coca-Cola is definitely not going to sponsor that. But this research has a huge social value to people. So how do we do that? We just do crowdfunding. So with we can do that with crowdfunding, and the whole idea of crowdfunding will be now surrounded with bonding curves. And Molecule is an example for that. With Molecule, instead of the very complicated curve with 2 different pools and everything that we talked about, Molecule is a lot simpler. It's a lot more straightforward, which is a lot more beautiful. It just has 2 curves, a buy curve and a sell curve. A buy curve is higher, a sell curve is lower. That means when you buy and you want to sell it somehow later, your selling price, the selling price at that period of time will always be lower than the buying price. Once again, this goes back to the idea of incentive alignment and reduction of free riders problem, which we will not go into details here, but this can help to incentivize people to not sell their tokens and to continuously sponsor or support and fund this research project. So because of that, in the Molecules example, in the Molecules bonding curve, you have 2 curves instead of 1. You have a buy curve and a sell curve. In that case then, we have 4 different variables instead of 5. So we have the buy curve, the sell curve. The fundraising aspect is really the correlation between the supply and the price of the tokens, because the bonding curve will continuously be minting tokens, and it will be minting, the price of these tokens will be related to the amount of tokens available. So it goes back to the first basic bonding curve model. And the last variable is ending fundraising. Ending the fundraising is very important because some projects do not always need to be fundraising continuously, right? With all these different research, you open a bonding curve for a specific research. Let's say I'm looking at creating a COVID-19 vaccine for pregnant women. Very specific use case, and I'm fundraising to only be researching on this use case. And if this use case, I've succeeded in the vaccine and it's gone for trial testing, then the fundraising stops. Then no one can fundraise anymore because whoever the fundraise, the money wouldn't be used anywhere else because the research is done. And whoever that stayed inside the ecosystem who has the token will be rewarded at a later date. So there is an ending to fundraising. That's a variable to consider. Some organizations are continuous and will keep going. Some organizations or some of these fundraising projects have an end date to it. So how does it work? Let's just go in a little bit of some details. Because it's a buy curve and a sell curve, the buy curve and sell curve work similar to the reserve pool and the funding pool that we talked about in Giveth and in Aragon. But instead of a pool that is divided in quite a complex model, we're just going to use math to define that. So let's say I am putting $100 into the system because I want to be funding $100 into this COVID-19 vaccine for pregnant women. And once it goes into the system, the bonding curve works in this way. The bonding curve will follow the buy curve because I'm buying the tokens. So I'm putting 100 DAI into the system. Then it will look at the area under the graph that is 100 DAI worth, and you realize, oh, okay, that means you're going to receive 300 tokens, so 300 project tokens. And that's good. So I give 100 DAI and I get 300 tokens. So token A for token B, right? Okay, then I keep that 300 tokens and then I keep it in my wallet and I pray that, please let the vaccine work and please let the trials be good. I really want to support this because I think it's a very important thing. That's all nice and good. Now, what goes underneath the curve? What goes inside the system? The system goes into two aspects. One is the funding pool, which is your research pool. One is the reserve pool, which is where people will be withdrawing, the pool where people can be withdrawing money from. With the research pool, let's say this model that we're looking at, 95% of it goes to the research pool. That means of the 100 DAI that I put in, $95 goes to the research, goes to funding the research. And $5 goes into the reserve pool, which is your sell curve. Because if anyone wants to sell the tokens, they will not sell it at the price of the buying curve that you have. So right now, if I want to take my 300 tokens and I said, this project sucks because I did some due diligence and I realized that the people are all scammed and I want to sell my tokens now. So imagine nobody bought anything yet. Right now, only 300 tokens exist and I want to pull out right now. Once I purchase and I realize, oh shit, I don't want to and I want to remove it. How does it work? In the sell curve, only 5% of the amount allocated goes into the sell curve. That means right now, the sell curve, so right now the entire system has 100 DAI, but only 5% goes to the sell curve. That means $5 DAI is in the sell curve. So when I want to sell my 300 tokens, although I bought those 300 tokens at 100 DAI, when I sell it, I only get 5 DAI back. This is a much more simpler and much easier to understand model. In that case, what happens when person 2 comes in? Person 2 also says, you know what? Person A put 100 DAI in. I also want to put 100 DAI in because I'm conservative. I don't want to have so much stake at this project. I just want to put 100 DAI in. So you say, okay, let's put 100 DAI in. I put 100 DAI into the ecosystem, into the smart contract. The smart contract will look at the area under the graph to get 100 DAI. And then it says, okay, now you are at a number of 500 tokens. So that means for 100 DAI that I put in, I'm only getting 200 tokens out because 500 minus 300 tokens is already existing. It's 200 tokens. So just now person A puts 100 DAI in, gets 300 tokens out. Person B puts 100 DAI in, gets 200 tokens out. That's the idea, that's the concept that they're having. Again, of this 100 DAI, 5% goes into the bonding curve, which is 5 DAI into the bonding curve. If person A hasn't taken it out, that means the amount of tokens in the reserve or the reserve pool or the money, the sell curve, is 10 DAI. So 5% from person A, 5% from person B, which is 10 DAI. And that 95% goes into the research. That's a very simple way to understand how a buy curve and a sell curve works, how allocation is given to people, how it reduces incentive to want to sell early because the amount that you purchase at and the amount that you're going to get back when you sell is very, very different. And it disincentivizes people from wanting to sell early and to speculate on that aspect. This also works because we're talking about medical research, about pharmaceutical research, about this kind of complex scientific research. So you definitely want to reduce speculation. And people who want to invest in them are more likely to not want to speculate, who are more likely wanting to support the system. But we still have a sell curve in there because, sometimes some people really have to sell their tokens because they really, really, really need their money. So we do want to put a sell curve in there to allow them to liquidate whenever they really need to. And what happens when it all ends? Let's say my medical research has been very successful and I don't need research anymore. I'm now, the success for vaccine for pregnant women has undergone some trials and it's very good. I'm stopping everything, all the funding. No more fundraising. How does that work now? There is still money in there's money in the sell curve, right? And whatever money that's left over in the buy curve or the research curve if you want. But whatever money that's left over now will be distributed to all the investors that's out there. So everyone gets an equal share. So you level it out. So this is just a simple model of how the buy-sell curve works and how Molecule's fundraising works. Now you're probably thinking, okay, if I'm putting money in and I'm just funding all this research, what is it in for me? How do I'm not just going to invest to be donating money. I might as well go and be donating, and then I can get tax reduction on that. But what is it in for me as an investor to want to invest in all these medical research? So the other aspect of, which I'm not covering because this is just fundraising, but another aspect that you can think of to incentivize investors is to give them some form of ownership to the success of the research. So some form of IP rights to this research that's being done. And if the research is being used by big pharmaceutical companies or being bought over, then these investors get to earn some form of returns or some profits from that. That could be a way to incentivize or to attract investors into your platform. Once again, this is not really related to fundraising. This is a whole different model from fundraising. That will be the project model or product model. And what we're talking about, the bonding curve here, is for the model of fundraising. The project model can also be using bonding curves to be defining the relationship with the tokens and the equity or the ownership to the product, to the research output. But that's a different case study that we're talking about. Right now, we're just talking about fundraising. What's the security token function? A security token function is where it represents an underlying asset. And this underlying asset, usually we call them a financial security, can generate revenues some way, somehow. How do we define that? Let's use a bonding curve. We're going to take the example of Fairmint. Fairmint uses a continuous organization mechanism to always fundraise for projects. And for projects, when you have these tokens, instead of claiming ownership of the company, you get to claim different revenues or profits that's generated by the company. How does it work? Once again, it has a simple bonding curve. So let's say the basic bonding curve that we talked about previously. And the collaterals, which is the area under the curve is where when you withdraw, you get to take some parts of the area under the curve. In the previous simple bonding curve, the area under the curve is defined by these, when people are putting money in, and then the area under the curve is defined by other people's money and your money as collaterals. But with Fairmint, what they are doing is to inject profits into the area under the curve based on the profits generated by the project or by the company. So let's say economic design uses the Fairmint mechanism to have a bonding curve. So that means you get to invest in economics design and you will get a token that represents part of the revenue of economics design. So let's say after year one, economics design earns X amount of money, of which 20% of this X amount will always go into the bonding curve. Yeah, I guess in a way it's a different version of stock buyback, but just think of it as I'm taking 20% of the year-end profits and putting it into the bonding curve. So now there's more funds in the bonding curve. and each of my token is worth more. So when I want to sell my tokens, then I will take the area under the curve, which is now bigger because I injected more capital based on the revenue. So the tokens just represent the claims on the profits by the company. There are 4 ways to trade the tokens. The first way is to get it minted at the reserve, from the reserve. So that means at the reserve is the bonding curve itself, the math function. The function is really to be the buyer and seller of last resort. If you go into the marketplace, if you go into the different exchange, and you want to buy economics design tokens, but there is none because everyone is holding onto it, because everyone is waiting for it to rise in price and then selling it after, or to invest in it. So no one is selling it, but you want to buy it. So you go to the smart contract, or you go to the bonding curve, and you say, hey, I want to buy economic design tokens. This is X amount of money that I have. Give me the amount of tokens that I can redeem for. So that's how it works. Then it can be bought and sold at market price. The cool thing about bonding curve that defines the price is that there is the market price available for everyone to see. It's transparent. So if I'm holding 100 economics design tokens, and person A comes to me and say, okay, I want to buy 50 tokens from you at market price, which is the price available on the bonding curve, how much is that? The difference between buying from me versus buying from the exchange is that the exchange means new tokens. Buying from me means that the total amount of tokens available is the same. So if there's 1,000 economic design tokens out there, that's 1,000. If a person buys from me and I sell 50 economic design tokens to that person, the ultimate tokens is still 1,000. But if the person goes to the bonding curve and says that I want to buy 50 tokens, then the overall tokens now will be 1,050 tokens. That will change a couple of things, and that will change some form of analysis. That will change the curve, the area under the curve, the amount of bond or collaterals that's under the curve, and that will change. But me selling and buying at market price wouldn't change much. It's just between you and me. And lastly, you can of course redeem it at exchanges. If you want to put the economic design on Bancor or Uniswap or on Balancer or Curve, for some reason, somehow it's pegged to a lot of other stuff, then it can be redeemed at different exchanges as well. So these are different ways to trade. So that is the conclusion of the general idea of how bonding curves are being applied to all these different systems. I don't want to create another 1-hour video because that is actually really long, and I can understand that it's very taxing because there's a lot of information, and to be absorbing all the information at once, it's extremely exhausting. So I just want to give you a general idea first to understand how these different bonding curves work, how they're being applied to these different fundraising approaches or fundraising initiatives. Now, everything will be meaningless if I'm not going to conclude with how do you apply it to your project. So let's check it out. The thing is, as I mentioned, the bonding curve, as I mentioned before, the bonding curve application to fundraising is quite different from the bonding curve application to autonomous market maker in the DeFi space. Because in the DeFi space, or in autonomous market makers, you can still have a general formula to understand how all these different things correlate. With fundraising, as you can imagine, with the Fairmint way, which is a claim on profits, it is a completely different model from the rest of them because you can earn money, or you can earn from a primary market version just by holding on to the token. And then you have Molecule, which is where you have a buy curve and a sell curve, and it functions in a very different way. And then you have Aragon, where you include a DAO in there because it works in a different kind of governance style. And then you have Giveth, where you have different proposals available, where you have a vesting period involved. So when it comes to fundraising, there isn't a general model involved. Instead, I'll just give you some things to take away, to consider when you're designing your fundraising mechanism using bonding curve. Questions would be stuff like, what are you fundraising for? How does the token function in your fundraising? What does your token represent? Is it representation of a claimant to something in the future? Is it representation of voting rights? Is it representation of asset to a form of collaterals? Is it representation to how funds will be allocated? What does the token represent? And lastly, how tokens will be used and distributed and allocated. I think allocation and distribution is very important, and sometimes you need to consider about that, but sometimes you don't. In the security function, you don't really have to consider about that because it can be allocated and distributed any way you want. Whatever the token is, it just means that there's a claimant to the profits generated by the company. That's it. You don't really need to care about how it's being used and allocated. But in other projects, that will make a bit more sense to have a very defined understanding of how tokens are used and allocated. So these are just questions to kickstart you with understanding or start thinking and brainstorming about how you can use bonding curves in your fundraising mechanism. This episode covers how bonding curves can be used in the different kind of token functions and in the different types of fundraising mechanisms that is available out there. There is no general formula. I really, really wish that there is a general formula. Everyone keeps asking what's the general formula for all of these different use cases. There is none. In Autonomous Market Maker, there is some way of a general formula because we are looking at a specific constant that's available. With fundraising, it really differs massively. That's it for this season 1 of the podcast. And in season 2, I will start looking at more specific use cases, doing more interviews with different projects, and to have more open conversations with different projects. There will also be a paid version. In fact, part of it will be a paid version. So do look out for the Patreon to get access to that, or check out our newsletter for the premium version to get access to that. In the meantime, if you're keen, we also have a token economics blueprint course. So this will be talking about all the token economics 201, going into very deep details, understanding all the different math, looking at different formulas, and we're having a 50% discount now for early bird. Once I'm done refilming everything, that's where the discount will stop. You will also get access to all the newly filmed episodes when you have purchased it at an early bird price as well. So use the code earlybird if you want to get access, and the link is over here at bit.ly/tokenomics201. Till then, I'll see you in the next season or see you at the course. Bye!